Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to this LinkedIn Live with me, Justin York, where for the next 20 to 25 minutes, we're going to be talking about, do you really understand your data ecosystem? We're going to be looking at why categorization, criticality, and retention matters more than organizations might realize, and more importantly, how behaviors impact those aspects of your data ecosystem. Now, many organizations want better data governance, they want better data quality, and they want stronger ownership across all of their data in their organization. But there is a question that is often missed. And that question is, do we actually understand the data ecosystem we are trying to govern? And in many cases, that's probably not as good as people might think. Ecosystems grow organically over time. They get bigger, the organization gets bigger, you get new tools, you get new warehouses, all sorts of things are happening. So your ecosystem gets bigger and bigger. But every organization has an ecosystem, small, medium, or large. They always have an ecosystem. So the 6 foundational things that I believe that you need to understand about your data ecosystem in order to answer questions about it and govern it effectively. These things are, what data have you got? And we're talking about big chunks of data here, HR, finance, logistics, whatever it is, big chunks of data. Where is it? Because there's a better than even chance that it's not in a single system. It won't be in a source system, just one source system. Even if you have an enterprise resource planning tool, the chances of it residing all in one system is pretty low, because the likelihood is you'll be creating bespoke reports and dashboards out of your warehouse, or you have a data lake, or you may even outsource some of your functions like payroll, for example. So where is the data? Then you need to understand how it gets from A to B. How is it moving around? Yeah, sure, it comes out of one system and goes to another, that's fine. And it's using that electric string, the fiber or whatever. But how is it actually doing that? So in the old days, we used to have things called interface control documents. And those things used to tell us what the interface was, what its purpose was, which data was moving, when it moved, and most importantly, who the contacts were at either end, so that we could sort out any issues that we had. These days, you may call those things data contracts, but you still need to understand how it's moving around. And then you need to understand who is using it and what for, because not all data is equal, as we're going to come on to. But you can't just use data that you see. So for example, if you were to create a new report or something and you wanted a value called total sales, and you looked and you saw, oh, there's a value called total sales, I'll use that one. But if you don't know how it's calculated, you don't know the reason that it's been created, then you shouldn't be using it, because you don't know whether it's for that purpose or not. The next thing we understand is who owns it? Who's the decision maker? Who allocates resource? Who prioritizes getting stuff fixed? Because they're really, really important inside this activity. And finally, we have to understand the quality of it, because somebody has to set the quality standards, and then it's up to the ownership in the organization to make sure that those standards are maintained in a way that meets the requirements of the business. It's not enough anymore to just understand that the data exists. They need to understand where it is, what type of data is it, what's the criticality of it, how sensitive is it, how do we need to control that stuff? Because if the ecosystem is unclear, ownership becomes harder, data stewardship becomes reactive, as I was speaking about last week, the data stewardship trap. And that means that governance struggles to land again. So as usual, this brings us back to people, and specifically the behaviors. And it's often that the behaviors are more powerful than your data ecosystem and your controls over it. But before you can govern data effectively, you need to understand the ecosystem that it lives in. Many organizations have. They've got the governance roles, they've got the frameworks, they've got the operating models, they've got the policies and all that kind of interesting stuff. All of that stuff is there. But you may not have the clear answers to what data do we actually have. And yeah, I've said about big chunks of data, HR and finance and that kind of stuff. But let's take HR as an example. You might have 3 sets of HR data. You might have employee, executive, and you might have, for example, third-party contractors. All of that data will contain similar types of things. So it will have names and addresses and emails and phone numbers, all that kind of stuff. But it will also have specific controls around it. Who can access it? Who can see it? Then we have to think about what data is the most critical to the organization. Now, if it's a regulatory type organization, such as banks or insurance companies or something like that, then actually the regulators tend to tell you what the most important stuff is. It's the stuff that gets reported to them. But outside of that, even if you're not in a regulated sort of environment, you still need to know what data is most critical. What is the stuff that's going to cause you the most damage if it isn't right? And then you might think about which data is the most sensitive. Now, we all talk about things like personally identifiable information and the sensitive area of that, where we talk about things like ethnicity, sexuality. We might talk about membership of trade unions, for example. All of those things have to be really, really tightly controlled. That's really sensitive personal data. But it's not the only sensitive data that exists in organizations. Think about new products that you haven't launched yet, but you don't want everybody to know about them yet. Think about profit reports and that type of thing for shareholders and what dividends they're going to get. These types of things you may not want released or out in the big wide world until such time as you want to release them. Which data is it that is driving the big decisions? So if you decide to expand your organization and employ another 100 people or something like that, or build a new factory or move offices, what is the data that's driving those kinds of decisions? There will be data that is being copied or retained unnecessarily. All sorts of reasons for that, which we're going to come on to some of them. But it will be about which data is being copied, which stuff is being retained. Sure, the old adage used to be storage is cheap, so we don't need to bother. But there is risk associated with retaining data. Which brings me on to which data creates the biggest risk if it's wrong. For some organizations, it could be financial reporting. For some organizations, it could be customer data that's wrong. Those types of things are likely to trip you up because you cannot embed governance in a data ecosystem until you properly understand it. Now we have to think about not all data is equal. Some organizations treat it as though it's all the same stuff and we should all give it the same level of attention, but it's not right because not all data is equal. It just isn't. Some data is operational in a sense that you might be fulfilling orders, that kind of thing. Or it might be operational in a sense that it makes the systems work. It may not be of particular value externally to your organization, or anybody else's organizations. They may not get any benefit from it. So in terms of criticality or categorization, you may treat that a bit lower. You don't spend as much time on it. Some data is critical. Some data might be sensitive personal data. Some data might be people's HR records. Other data might be mergers and acquisitions. Those types of things could be really critical data. Some of it is very, very sensitive. Again, we come back to personally identifiable information. It has to be kept under wraps. Medical records, that type of stuff. It's really, really sensitive stuff. But as I've already said, in an organization, you might have sensitive data that could be about profit warnings or profit margins and those types of things. Some of it is regulatory, particularly in the financial services environment, insurance, banks, that type of thing. Regulators want reports. They want to know how robust your balance sheets are. They want to know certain things about the organization. Some of it will be driving key decisions. So not only do we build a new factory, buy a new machine, or whatever it is? But it might be about laying people off, making people redundant, making more use of AI. All of those types of things are driving big decisions in organizations. Some data will be duplicated. You only have to think about sources of data in your source systems and stuff in the warehouse. There's duplication there because you're taking copies of it and putting it in a warehouse in order to produce reports. Now, a while ago, not so many, a decade or so ago, people used to take the data that they wanted or needed for their report out the source system and put that in the warehouse. So we had a very small copy. Now people just go, oh, we'll just take the whole data set. We'll just put it all in there. So then we have the source system and then we have another set of data in the warehouse. Those two things will move apart gradually in terms of quality and standards and that type of thing. And some of the data is just old. It's retained, but it's rarely questioned. Lots of examples of this. People keep stuff, but they don't know why they keep it. They don't know if they should keep it. They don't know if they should get rid of it. So old data just gets retained. The thing is, you can't govern everything with the same level of intensity. So the trick is to understand what matters the most to you. Because if everything is treated as important, then not everything is prioritized. And prioritization is really important. So data categorization will give your data ecosystem a shape. It helps all organizations to understand what data it is that they are actually holding. So we've already talked about the big chunks, and we talked about slightly smaller chunks, but what sort of data have you actually got? How much of it do you have? How should it be handled? Because when we categorize things, we should also be thinking about how do we handle it. Now, you would see in lots of civil service type organizations or public service organizations, you'd have things like restricted and confidential and secret and top secret and all that kind of stuff. But that dictates how the data should be handled. Who can see it? Who can access it? How do we move it around? Is it encrypted? Can we email it? Maybe we can't. So how should it be handled? But leaks happen, accidents happen. So you only have to think about, even with all the controls, you only have to think about those 3,700 names of Afghan interpreters and their families that was inadvertently published on an open website. Yes, it was taken down 15 or 20 minutes later, but it doesn't matter. People still got copies of it. And that created quite a lot of risk for those people. So we also have to think about who should be owning this data. Somebody has to own it. It's got to be looked after. Somebody has to make decisions, allocate resource, prioritize things, get stuff fixed, remove blockers. All of those things need to be done. So somebody has to do that. Who gets to look at it? Data owners dictate who gets to look at the data. Because in an organization, if you take the HR example, where we've got executives, employees, third-party contractors, nobody is going to want in HR for the employees to log onto a system and be able to see the executive's data. They don't want to do that. So we have to have sets of controls about who should access it, who can see that data. And because of that, we need to understand what those controls and rules and standards are. How do we go about putting those things together such that we have a level of control? We have a view about who can see what. We need to know which stuff is sensitive, which stuff is regulated. We need to understand that as well. And then we have to think about, does it support reporting, operations, or decisions? When you bundle all of these things together, you start to get a picture, an idea of what your ecosystem looks like. So categorization is helping you to create structure. And this is not about tidying up the data. It's about making better decisions on how it should be handled. So once we have categorization, we can then think about criticality. And criticality helps organizations to focus the effort that they are putting into governing and managing the data. Remember, not all data is equal. So critical data is the data that matters the most to outcomes, to operations, reporting, customers, compliance, or risk, or all of those things. You might have data that covers the whole breadth of those types of things. So that is the critical data. That is the stuff that you have to be really careful of. But if criticality is unclear, teams can end up chasing the loudest issue. And by the loudest issue, I mean the person that's jumping up and down, the senior person's going, get this fixed, I want this fixed. You might run around trying to fix that, but it might have no real impact on risk or control or regulatory reporting or anything else. It's just somebody jumping up and down, I want something fixed. So we have to understand those things. So the issue that causes the most noise is not always the issue that is creating the greatest risk. And so owners and stewards need to know which data is truly critical so that they can focus attention, effort, and governance activity where it matters the most. Now, one other thing that we often forget about is things like data retention. It's part of the ecosystem. It's a really critical part of it. It's often treated as a policy or a compliance issue, but it's also a behavior problem. Now, people keep data for any number of reasons. One of those reasons is, well, I might need it later. Well, yeah, you could do. Maybe it'll be a rainy day and you've got nothing else to do. So I know I'll go and look at that piece of data that I kept 15 years ago because, that would be really interesting to me now, if you can find it, if you can remember where it is. Maybe they don't trust the official system. Maybe they just don't trust systems. They think, actually, I'll get a copy of that. Do you know why I'll get a copy? Because I don't want it deleting, because I need to have that. Because if I haven't got it, then, we could have real problems. They want evidence for the defense, mostly, or the prosecution. Now, when I say that, I have heard so many times where somebody said, oh, I don't think you did that job I asked you to do. Yes, I did. I've got an email. I sent you an email, and here's a copy of it. Right? Evidence for the defense. And that goes on a lot because that implies that people don't feel psychologically safe in their organization. The culture isn't what you might expect that says they trust people to do what they're being told. Yes, people make mistakes. That's just people. It's the way it is. They rely on old reports. So if you've got a copy on your desktop that you've taken from the server, okay, you keep looking at that, but the real live data may have been updated, and therefore you're not looking at the most relevant stuff. Another thing is that nobody knows whether it should be deleted or not. So I worked in an organization where the data owner for a particular set of admin data was the director's PA. And she said, oh, well, no, we can't get rid of it. It's all absolutely critical and everything else. And I looked through it and sort of said, well, okay, so 2 directors ago, they went, yeah, they've been gone 4 years now. And they went, yeah, I've been gone 4 years now. So why is their personal gym training profile still on our systems? Yeah, we could probably get rid of that. I said, yeah, that's not the point. That should we get rid of it? Yes, we should get rid of it. The other thing is, well, what was it doing on there in the first place? It's not his personal storage. You look at something else, and there's a whole raft of pictures from Christmas parties past, right before GDPR. But the thing is, if you've got those pictures on there, do you have the consents for you to be able to retain those pictures? And if you don't, then they shouldn't be there, or don't get the consents. For some people, local copies feel a lot safer. But mostly it's because the rules of retention are unclear. And then all this does, it creates clutter, duplicate, confusion, and risk. And what's one of those things we're trying to get rid of? Is the risk. We don't want a whole load of new risk. So if people don't know what to keep, they often keep everything. And yeah, storage is cheap and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Get that. That's fine. But you don't need to pay for storage if you're keeping the place tidied up. I'll give you another example. I worked in an organization where they had kept all their hard copy stuff, had been stored away at a well-known document filing company. And I was talking to them about data retention, and they went, "Oh yeah, well, we don't get rid of anything. We can't get rid of anything. I know it's absolutely critical that we keep stuff." So is it right? Okay. What about all this stuff then that you had? Oh yeah, well that's at X company. I said, yeah, but those years are not there. Oh yeah, they are. Yeah, they're definitely there. So no, they had a fire. It's all been turned to ash. Oh, right. Okay. Now tell me the last time you went and got a document out of storage. Nobody knew. So the chances are some of that stuff, 20, 30 years old, it's never going to get looked at, but you're paying somebody to store it on your behalf. So why would you do that? Better systems is what you need. So then we have to think about the behavior ecosystem that's sitting here behind all of this. If people don't trust the data, they take copies. Then they look at those copies and they're out of date, right? But they trust those more than they do the official systems. If the ownership is unclear, people avoid the decisions. They won't take decisions because, is it my job to take a decision? Should I be taking that decision? They won't take decisions. If retention rules are vague, then they'll keep everything. They'll just keep stuff because they just don't know what they can get rid of. A lot of this stuff, some of it is regulatory, right? Because certain things have to be retained, like asbestos records, all that kind of stuff. But other stuff comes down to common sense. If the criticality of the data is undefined or it's unclear, priorities become subjective. What somebody else says is a priority may not be a priority for me because I see the world differently to them. And if categorization is unclear, handling becomes inconsistent. I'll go back to those 3,700 names of those Afghan interpreters and families that were released inadvertently because people didn't follow the rules. So the data ecosystem is not just technical. It's shaped by the way people create, they use, they move, they copy, they fix and make decisions around the data. So your data ecosystem is also a behavior system. So if you want data governance to land, you need to understand the ecosystem it is trying to influence. You have to understand the people and engage the people that are going to manage that ecosystem. That means understanding what data exists, how it is categorized, how critical it is to the organization, who is using it and what for? Because if they're using it for the wrong purposes, you could be creating all kinds of risks. How is it moving around? Remember, you might have some stuff on a third-party payroll company. You're moving stuff off the site. How does it get there? Is it encrypted? You move it through, through a particular set of encryption regulations between two companies. How long do we keep it for? What is the regulation? What is the rules? What is the setting for us to say this stuff we have to keep for X number of years, months, whatever it is? Where are copies taken? Outside of the major systems, like in your warehouses or data lakes, that kind of stuff. Outside of that, how many people have got copies on their desktops? What risk is it creating? Because it will be creating some level of risks. And who is it that owns the decisions around that? Because it's those decisions. Some of the data will be covered by all of those things: categorization, criticality, who's using it, how does it move, all that kind of stuff. This is exactly what my data ecosystem diagnostic is designed to explore. It helps organizations look beyond the visible data issues and understand the ownership, behavior, and ecosystem gaps that may be stopping governance from landing. You want more data? You want more information about my data ecosystem diagnostic? Then put data diagnostic in the comments, and I'll happily send you a link with more information about it. So that's what I've got for you today. Join me next week when we're going to be talking about your data ecosystem and what it needs to be in order to you to have success. Join me then. I'll see you next week.